Thus the geometrical facts concerning straight and flat loci are public facts characterizing the feelings of actual entities. It so happens that in this epoch of the universe the feelings involving them are of dominating importance. A feeling in which the forms exemplified in the datum concern geometrical, straight, and flat loci will be called a strain. In a strain, qualitative elements, other than the geometrical forms, express themselves as qualities implicated in those forms. Also the forms are the form's ingredient in particular nexus forming the objective data of the physical feelings in question. It is to be remembered that 2 points determine a complete straight line, that 3 non-collinear points determine a complete plane, that 4 non-coplanar points determine a complete three-dimensional flat locus. Thus a strain has a complex distribution of geometrical significance. There is the geometrical, C, which is composed of a limited set of loci which are certain sets of points. These points belong to the volume defining the standpoint of the experient subject. A strain is a complex integration of simpler feelings, and it includes in its complex character simpler feelings in which the qualities concerned are more particularly associated with 473 seat. But the geometrical interest which dominates the growth of a strain lifts into importance the complete lines, planes, and three-dimensional flats, which are defined by the seat of the strain. In the process of integration, these wider geometrical elements acquire implication with the qualities originated in the simpler stages. The process is an example of the category of transmutation, and is to be explained by the intervention of intermediate conceptual feelings. Thus extensive regions, which are penetrated by the geometrical elements concerned, acquire objectification by means of the qualities and geometrical relations derived from the simpler feelings. This type of objectification is characterized by the close association of qualities and definite geometrical relations. It is the basis of the so-called projection of sensa. This projection of sensa in a strain takes many forms according to the differences among various strains. F. Strains 311. Sometimes the seat retains its individual importance. Sometimes in the final synthesis it has been almost eliminated from the final synthesis of feelings into the one strain. Sometimes the whole extensive region indicated by the wider geometrical elements is only vaguely geometricized. In this case, there is feeble geometrical indication. The strain then takes the vague form of feeling certain qualities which are vaguely external. Sometimes the extensive region is geometricized without any corresponding elimination of importance from the seat. In this case, tether is a dual reference to the seat here, and to some objectified region there. The here is usually some portion of an animal body, whereas the geometricized region may be within, or without, the animal body concerned. It is obvious that important feelings of strain involve complex processes of concrescence. They are accordingly only to be found in comparatively high-grade actual entities. They do not in any respect necessarily involve consciousness, or even that approach to consciousness which we associate with life. But we shall find that the 474 behavior of enduring physical objects is only explicable by reference to the peculiarities of their strains. On the other hand, the occurrences in empty space require less emphasis on any peculiar ordering of strains. But the growth of ordered physical complexity is dependent on the growth of ordered relationships among strains. Fundamental equations in mathematical physics, such as Maxwell's electromagnetic equations, are expressions of the ordering of strains throughout the physical universe. Section 2. Presentational immediacy is our perception of the contemporary world by means of the senses. It is a physical feeling. But it is a physical feeling of a complex type to the formation of which conceptual feelings, more primitive physical feelings, and transmutation have played their parts amid processes of integration. Its objective datum is a nexus of contemporary events, under the definite illustration of certain qualities and relations. These qualities and relations are prehended with the subjective form derived from the primitive physical feelings, thus becoming our private sensations. Finally, as in the case of all physical feelings, this complex derivative physical feeling acquires integration with the valuation inherent in its conceptual realization as a type of experience. Naive common sense insists, first, on the subject entertaining this feeling, and, secondly, on the analytic components in the order I region in contemporary world as datum, each sensations is derivative from, and illustrative of, this datum, integral feeling involving these elements, i.e. appreciative subjective form, v interpretive subjective form, v purposive subjective form. But this analysis of presentational immediacy has not exhausted the content of the feeling. For we feel with the body. 312. The theory of extension. There may be some further specialization into a particular organ of sensation, but in any case the witness of the body is an ever-present, 475 though elusive, element in our perceptions of presentational immediacy. This witness is the trace of the origination of the feeling concerned, enshrined by that feeling in its subjective form and in its objective datum. But in itself this witness of the body can be isolated as a component feeling in the final satisfaction. From this point of view, the body, or its organ of sensation, becomes the objective datum of a component feeling, and this feeling has its own subjective form. Also this feeling is physical, so that we must look for an eternal object, to be a determinant of the definiteness of the body, as objective datum. This component feeling will be called the feeling of bodily efficacy. It is more primitive than the feeling of presentational immediacy which issues from it. Both in common sense and in physiological theory, this bodily efficacy is a component presupposed by the presentational immediacy and leading up to it. Thus, in the immediate subject, the presentational immediacy is to be conceived as originated in a late phase, by the synthesis of the feeling of bodily efficacy with other feelings. We have now to consider the nature of the other feelings, and the complex eternal object concerned in the feeling of bodily efficacy. In the first place, this eternal object must be partially identified with the eternal object in the final feeling of presentational immediacy. The whole point of the connection between the two feelings is that the presentational immediacy is derivative from the bodily efficacy. The present perception is strictly inherited from the antecedent bodily functioning, unless all physiological teaching is to be abandoned. Both eternal objects are highly complex, and the complex elements of the second eternal object must at least be involved in the complex elements of the former eternal object. This complex eternal object is analyzable into a sense datum and a geometrical pattern. In physics, the geometrical pattern appears as a state of strain of that actual occasion in the body which is the subject of the 476 feeling. But this feeling of bodily efficacy in the final percipient is the reenaction of an antecedent feeling by an antecedent actual entity in the body. Thus in this antecedent entity there is a feeling concerned with the same sense datum and a highly analogous state of strain. The feeling must be a strain in the sense defined in the previous section. Now this strain involves a geometricized region, which in this case also involves a focal region as part of itself. This focal region is a region of dense concurrence of straight lines defined by the seat. It is the region onto which there is so-called projection. These lines enter into feeling through a process of integration of yet simpler feelings which primarily concern the seat of the pattern. These lines have a twofold function as determinants of the feeling. They define the strain of the feeler, and they define the focal region which they thus relate to the feeler. Insofar as we are merely considering an abstract strains 313 pattern, we are dealing with an abstract eternal object. But as a determinant of a concrete feeling in a concrete percipient, we are dealing with the feeling as relating its subject, which includes the seat, in its volume to a definite spatial region, the focal region external to itself. This definite contemporary focal region is a nexus which is part of the objective datum. Thus the feeling of bodily efficacy is the feeling of the sense datum as generally implicated in the whole region of antecedent, seats, and focal regions geometrically defined by the inherited strains. This patterned region is peculiarly dominated by the final seat in the body of the feeler, and by the final focal region. Thus the sense datum has a general spatial relation, in which two spatial regions are dominant. Feelings of this sort are inherited by many strands from the antecedent bodily nerves. But in considering one definite feeling of presentational immediacy, these many strands of transmission of bodily efficacy, in their final deliverance to the ultimate percipient, converge upon the same focal region as picked out by the many bodily strains. 477. In the integration of these feelings a double act of transmutation is achieved. In each of the successive feelings transmitted along the successive actual entities of a bodily nervous strand there are two regions mainly concerned, and there is a relation between them constituted by intermediate regions picked out by the linkage of the pattern. One region is the focal region already discussed. The other region is the seat in the immediate subject, constituting its geometrical standpoint. The strain of the final actual entity defines the seat, and the focal region, and the intermediate regions, and more vaguely the whole of a presented space. This final feeling of bodily strain in the sense of strain defined in the previous section is the last of a root of analogous feelings inherited one from the other along the series of bodily occasions along some nerve or other path in the body. There will be parallel roots of such analogous feelings,
which finally converge with concurrent reinforcement upon the single occasion, or root of occasions, which is the ultimate percipient. Each of these bodily strain feelings defines its own seat and its own focal region and intermediaries. The sense datum is vaguely associated with the external world as thus felt and defined. But as such feelings are transmuted, either gradually, or at critical nodes in the body, there is an increasing development of special emphasis. Now emphasis is valuation, and can only be changed by renewed valuation. But valuation arises in conceptual feelings. The conceptual counterpart of these physical feelings can be analyzed into many conceptual feelings, associating the sense datum with various regions defined by the strain. This conceptual feeling, by its reference to definite regions, belongs to the secondary type termed propositional feelings. One subordinate propositional feeling associates the sense datum with the seat of the feeler, another with the focal region of the feeler, another with the intermediary region of the feeler, another with the seats of the antecedent elements of the 4-7-8 nervous strand, and so. The theory of extension. 314. On. The total association of the sense datum with space-time is analyzable into a bewildering variety of associations with definite regions, contemporary and antecedent. In general, and apart from high-grade organisms, this spatio-temporal association of the sense datum is integrated into a vague sense of externality. The component valuations have in such cases failed to differentiate themselves into grades of intensity. But in high-graded cases, in which presentational immediacy is prominent, one of three cases happens. Either the association of the sense datum with the seats of some antecedent sets of feelers is exclusively emphasized, or the association of the sense datum with the focal region of the final percipient is exclusively emphasized, or the association of the sensidatum both with the seats of antecedent feelers and with the focal region of the immediate feeler is emphasized. But these regions are not apprehended in abstraction from the general spatio-temporal continuum. The prehension of a region is always the prehension of systematic elements in the extensive relationship between the seat of the immediate feeler and the region concerned. When these valuations have been effected, the category of transmutation provides for the transmission to the succeeding subject of a feeling of these regions qualified by i.e., contrasted with that sense datum. In the first case, there are purely bodily sensations. In the second case, there are projected sensations involving regions of contemporary space beyond the body. In the third case, there are both bodily feelings and sensations externally projected. Thus in the case of all sensory feeling, there is initial privacy of conceptual emphasis passing into publicity of physical feeling. Thus, by the agency of the category of transmutation, there are two types of feelings, for which the objective datum is a nexus with undiscriminated actual entities. The feelings of the first type are feelings of causal efficacy, and those of the second type are those of crescenta 479 tonal immediacy. In the first type, the analogous elements in the various feelings of the various actualities of the bodily nexus are transmuted into a feeling ascribed to the bodily nexus as one entity.
In the second type, the transmutation is more elaborate and shifts the nexus concerned from the antecedent bodily nexus, i.e., the seat, to the contemporary focal nexus. Both these types of feeling are the outcome of a complex process of massive simplification which is characteristic of higher grades of actual entities. They apparently have but slight importance in the constitutions of actual occasions in empty space, but they have dominating importance in the physical feelings belonging to the life histoire of enduring organisms, the inorganic and organic, alike. In respect to the sense of concern, there is a gradual transformation of their functions as they pass from occasion to occasion along a route of inheritance up to some final high-grade CX variant. In their most primitive form of functioning, a sensum is felt physically with emotional enjoyment. Strains. 315 of its sheer individual essence. For example, red is felt with emotional enjoyment of its sheer redness. In this primitive prehension we have a boric-einal physical feeling in which the subject feels itself as enjoying redness. This is Hume's impression of sensation, stripped of all spatial relations with other such impressions. Insofar as they spring up in this primitive, aboriginal way, they, in Hume's words, arise in the soul from unknown causes. But in fact we can never isolate such ultimate irrationalities. In our experience, as in distinct analysis, physical feelings are always derived from some antecedent experience. Occasion deprehends occasiona as an antecedent subject experiencing a sensum with emotional intensity. Also the subjective form of emotion is conformed to a subjective form. Thus there is a vector transmission of emotional feeling of a sensum from A to B. In this way B feels the sensum is derived from A and feels it with an emotional form, 480 also derived from A. This is the most primitive form of the feeling of causal efficacy. In physics it is the transmission of a form of energy. In the bodily transmission from occasion to occasion of a high-grade animal body, there is a gradual modification of these functions of sensa. In their most primitive functioning for the initial occasions within the animal body, they are qualifications of emotion types of energy. In the language of physics, T in their final functioning for the high-grade X-variant occasion at the end of the route, they are qualities, inherent, in a presented, contemporary nexus. In the final percipient any conscious feeling of the primitive emotional functioning of the sensum is often entirely absent. But this is not always the case. For example, the perception of a red cloak may often be associated with a feeling of red irritation. To return to Hume's doctrine, cf. Treatise, Part 3, Sect. D. Of the origination of impressions of sensation from unknown causes, it is first necessary to distinguish logical priority from physical priority. Undoubtedly an impression of sensation is logically the simplest of physical prehensions. It is the percipient occasion feeling the sensum as participat-ing in its own concrescence. This is the enjoyment of a private sensation. There is a logical simplicity about such a sensation which makes it the primitive, aboriginal type of physical feeling. But there are two objections to Hume's doctrine which assigns to them a physical priority. First, there is the empirical objection. Hume's theory of a complex of such impressed science elaborated into a supposition of a common physical world is entirely contrary to naive experience.
We find ourselves in the double role of agents and patients in a common world, and the conscious recognition of impressed tilde science of sensation is the work of sophisticated elaboration. This is also Locke's doctrine in the third and fourth books of his essay. The child first dimly elucidates the complex externality of particles, 481 blar things exhibiting a welter of forms of definiteness, and then disentangles his impressions of these forms in isolation. A young man does not initiate his experience by dancing with impressions of sensation, and then proceed. 316. The theory of extension to conjecture a partner. His experience takes the converse route. The unempirical character of the philosophical school derived from Hume cannot be too often insisted upon. The true empirical doctrine is that physical feelings are in their origin vectors, and that the genetic process of concrescence introduces the elements which emphasize privacy. Secondly, Hume's doctrine is necessarily irrational. For if the impressions of sensation arise from unknown causes, cf. Hume, loco cit, a stop is put to the rationalistic search for a rational cosmology. Such a cosmology requires that metaphysics shall provide a doctrine of relevance between a form and any occasion in which it participates. If there be no such doctrine, all hope of approximating to a rational view of the world vanishes. Hume's doctrine has no recommendation except the pleasure which it gives to its adherents. The philosophy of organism provides for this relevance by means of two doctrines, I. The doctrine of God embodying a basic completeness of appetition, and E. The doctrine of each occasion affecting a concrescence of the universe, including God. Then, by the category of conceptual reproduction, the vector prehensions of God's appetition, and of other occasions, issue in the mental pole of conceptual prehensions, and by integration of this pole with the pure physical prehensions there arise the primitive physical feelings of sensa, with their subjective forms, emotional and purposive. These feelings, with their primitive simplicity, arise into distinctness by reason of the elimination effected by this integration of the vector prehensions with the conceptual appetitions. Such primitive feelings cannot be separated from their subjective forms. The subject never loses its triple character of recipient, patient, and agent. These primitive feel 482-ings have already been considered under the name of physical purposes, cf. Part 3, ch. d. They correspond to Hume's impressions of sensation, but they do not originate the process of experience. We see that a feeling of presentational immediacy comes into being by reason of an integration of a conceptual feeling drawn from bodily efficacy with a bare regional feeling which is also a component in a complex feeling of bodily efficacy. Also this bare regional feeling is reinforced with the general regional feeling which is the whole of our direct physical feeling of the contemporary world, and the conceptual feeling is reinforced by the generation of physical purpose. This integration takes the form of the creative imputation of the complex eternal object, ingredient in the bodily efficacy, onto some contemporary focal region felt in the strain feeling. Also the subjective form is transmitted from the conceptual valuation and the derivate, physical purpose. But this subjective form is that suitable to the bodily efficacy out of which it has arisen. Thus the mere region with its imputed eternal object is felt as though there had been a feeling of its efficacy. but there is no mutual efficacy of contemporaries. Strains. 317. Regions. This transference of subjective form is termed symbolic transference. 1. An additional conceptual